All right, now let's take a look and see how we would lay this module pattern out in practice. All right, so if you remember, we have a task object, and this task has a name on it, it's complete, and we've got a couple of prototype methods as well on top of this task. And then we have main.js that just creates 4 copies of this object, and then we save and complete a couple of times. What I want to do now is I want to implement a database service that is a module that'll deal with all of our database stuff for us. Now, to keep this simple, I'm not going to actually go through the motions of doing all the database work because that's really outside the scope of what we're talking about here, but I am going to put in the functions and methods so that you can see how that all would work. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to create a new file called our task repository. Well, let's rename that to be .js. All right, now this task repository is going to be responsible for doing all of our database calls. And so if you remember from the slides, basically we just create a function. So var repo equals a function. And then I'm going to return an object. And this object is just going to be a series of methods that are going to be relative to database stuff. So database gets, database saves, those types of things. And then I'll use these methods over in our main and our task in order to work. So let's create a couple of methods. We'll do a get, and get is going to be a function that's going to take an ID. And we'll just write out to the console in this case, getting task ID, and that'll simulate us getting something from the database. And then we'll actually return just a JSON object with a name. And we'll just call it new task from database. So basically what this simulates is I've gone out to the database and I've pulled back a task and I return that task up to the calling function. All right, so there's my API essentially for my repository. So now I'm just going to export module.exports equals repo. And I can go ahead and execute this right here. So module.exports is actually going to be this return section right here. All right, so let's try that and see if that works. So if I go back over to main where I have var task equals require task, now I can have var repo equals require our task repository. And now I can do task 1, instead of saying task 1 is this, let's just get rid of that. And now I can say repo.get and pass in an ID and then wrap that in the new task. So now I'm creating a new task and I'm using my task repository to go out to the database and get that task back. Now, one thing we want to change is notice I was sending a JSON object back with name. In my task object, I'm actually passing in name. So let's just pass in a JSON object with some data in it. And you'll actually see this a lot. Instead of my constructor taking 12 parameters with all the different things, I'm just going to take a JSON object and have that object be my list. So there we go, data.name. All right, so let's try this out and see if that works. What I should see is getting task 1, and then when I do task1.complete, it should say completing task, and then the name of the task would be this one I pulled from the database, new task from DB. So let's try that out. There you go. Getting task 1, completing task, new task from database. So I have a method here in my repository that does my gets. Now that's only one. Let's add another one that does saves. So comma, save, and that's going to take a task. And in this case, we're just going to do a console.log saving task.name to the database. All right, so now whenever I call save on my repository, it's going to save it to the database. Now, instead of doing this from main, let's do this one from task. So I'm going to do the same thing. Repo equals require task repository. Now here, when I'm doing task prototype.save, console.log, instead of writing that, or actually let's leave that there, and now we're going to do repo.save, and I'm going to pass in this. Now in this case, this is the task. So I'm passing in this.name and this.completed into my repository. So now when it says saving task.name, we should see that. Now, if we go back to our main call stack, task2.save, 3.save, and 4.save, you should see demo for modules, demos for singletons, demos for prototypes, all being saved to the database. So let's run that. There you go. To the database, to the database. Now everything's undefined. And the reason for that is because when we do our new task here, we didn't change this to be an object. So let's do that. All right, now that I've changed that, there you go. Now when I run it, you can see saving create a demo for modules to the database, saving create a demo for singletons to the database. This is a module. This is how this works. So basically, I've taken all my database code and I've encapsulated it in this repository object and gone from there. Now, the reason why we want to do this is when this function is executed, I can actually create a variable and instantiate my database connection and do all my database work here. And because of the way JavaScript closures work, every method that gets called, so my get method and my save method, has access to that database stuff up above. Nothing else has access to it. None of my calling functions can get to it. My database is secured up in this module, but all of my methods, my get method and my save method, can have access back up to that database. Now, one slightly alternate method, and a method I actually prefer for this, is called the revealing module pattern. And it basically means instead of doing this, I'm going to get rid of that, and I'm going to create my function up here. And I'm going to define my methods up above, and then down here in my return, I have my list of my methods. And this way, I can just go to my return statement. Anywhere I go into a module, I can go to the return statement and I can see what methods are available on this module. So it's just basically a little documentation for my API that says, look, this module has a get method and a save method. And if I want more details, I can go up and look at them up above. So that's the module pattern in practice in our Node environment.